She stepped off the train expecting a husband, a small home, maybe even chickens in the yard, but there was no one waiting. Just a barefoot boy, dusty wind, and 6 hungry eyes watching from a cabin beyond the ridge. "You Clara Mayfield?" he asked. "Yes." "Pa's dead," the boy said. And that's how her story began, not as a bride, but as a stranger to 7 abandoned children. And what she did next, no one could have predicted. The cabin looked like it could fall with one wrong gust of wind. Clara walked behind Sam, her shoes heavy with mud and uncertainty. The other children waited on the porch. 3 girls, 2 boys, and the smallest a baby crawling near the wooden steps. None of them spoke. Clara wanted to cry. Not for herself, for them. For the way they stared at her like hope was something they were scared to believe in. Inside, the smell of damp wood and boiled onions clung to everything. "We don't got much," Sam muttered, gesturing at the single pot on the stove. Clara nodded. "Then we'll make do." She placed her small bag on the table and looked each child in the eye. "I'm not here to replace anyone," she said softly. "I came for a husband. But maybe I found a reason to stay." Ruth, the eldest girl, barely 12, kept her distance at first. She watched Clara with sharp, suspicious eyes. She stirred the stew like she was guarding it. When Clara offered to help, Ruth didn't move. "Ma always cooked, till she couldn't. Then I did." Clara didn't push. She picked up a broom instead, swept the corners, rewashed the dishes, hung up clothes to dry. By nightfall, she had memorized every creaking floorboard and every face. The baby's name was Eli. Then came Jonah, barely walking, but always holding something, a spoon, a stick, a rock. Mabel and Josie were twins, quiet and wide-eyed. Then Daniel, who hadn't spoken a word. And Sam, 10 going on 40. That first night, Clara didn't sleep. The wind scraped the walls like fingernails. She sat by the fireplace, her coat still on one hand, resting on her bag like a lifeline. She read the letter again. Richard's handwriting was firm but rushed. "If something happens before you arrive, don't leave. They'll need someone stronger than me, someone who knows what it means to fight for love." The words didn't make sense back then. Now they felt like prophecy. Clara rose with the sun. She milked the goat. She found eggs in a corner of the barn no one had checked in weeks. She cleaned out the well bucket, washed the children's feet one by one, brushed tangles from their hair. That day no one went hungry. That night Daniel spoke his first word in months. "Mama!" Ruth stood frozen. Clara blinked hard. "I'm not her," she said. Daniel tilted his head. "Not yet." Days turned into weeks. The land was unforgiving, but Clara was more so. She taught the children to sew patches, count coin braid rope. She read by candlelight from books half-eaten by mice. The children listened like they were being handed treasure. Then came the knock. Late one night. A man in a brown coat, eyes too familiar. "Name's Mr. Lanning," he said. "I own the land your husband rented. He's gone now. So is the contract." Clara stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "We'll pay." "With what?" "Work, skill, time," he chuckled. "I need coin, not spirit." She didn't beg, didn't flinch. "Then I suggest you return in spring, when our hands have something worth trading." He spat, cursed, and left. But not before saying, "I'll be back. Don't make me take the house by force." That night Clara met with Sam and Ruth. "We plant everything. Wheat, potatoes, even dandelions if we have to. Come spring, we're not just surviving, we're proving something." Sam lit the lantern. Ruth nodded. The war wasn't over. But they had a general. Winter arrived without warning. The wind came first, gnawing through walls, rattling windows, finding its way into every seam of the cabin. Then came the snow. Thick, heavy, relentless. Clara stood at the stove, stirring a pot of thin broth, counting beans in her head, and trying to make numbers stretch further than nature allowed. One night the chimney clogged. Smoke filled the room. She sent the children out wrapped in blankets while she climbed to the roof herself with a rusted hook and lungs full of ash. By the time she came down, her hands were blistered, her eyes red. She didn't speak of it, just said, "Soup's ready." They rationed candles, boiled snow, used every scrap of wood they had stored since October. Sam trapped rabbits. Ruth dried herbs. Daniel took to sleeping, curled up against Clara's side like a pup breathing softly, hands always grasping the edge of her shawl. Every night Clara read to them from a battered Bible with torn pages and no cover. But her voice gave the stories back their shape. Noah, Ruth, Esther. The children began asking questions, big ones. What happens when people die? Why do some people leave? Will you leave? Clara always answered the same way. I came here on a promise. And I stay for one reason only, because I choose to. On Christmas morning, they awoke to a frozen world. But inside, Clara had prepared something more valuable than gifts. Warm bread baked slow over embers, a single orange split 7 ways, and a song, the one her mother had sung in a different country, a different lifetime. When she finished, Ruth whispered, "You made this house alive again." Clara smiled. "No, sweetheart. You did that when you let me in. But peace like spring takes its time." On the 3rd week of January, Mr. Lanning returned, this time with 2 men and a document signed by the county. "You've overstayed. This land goes back to me." Clara didn't argue. She handed him a piece of cloth. Inside was a ledger, handwritten clean exact. Every debt calculated, every item bartered, every hour worked listed and signed by neighbors who now considered her kin. One of the men read it in silence. "You have the right to present this before the judge." Lanning scowled. "They don't own paper that matters." Sam stepped forward, holding a sack of potatoes. "Maybe not, but we own the food you'll need next month." The man didn't respond, just turned, left, angry but beaten. That night, the fire burned longer. Clara didn't cry, but she did let herself sit. Breathe, exhale. Ruth placed a blanket over her shoulders. "When the snow melts," she said, "we build a fence, plant carrots, maybe even daisies." "Daisies," Clara smiled. "Mama loved them, and I think you would too." Spring came slow but sure. The snow receded. Grass peeked through frost-bitten earth. The children shed their coats like butterflies, shaking off old skins. Clara began every day before the sun. She tilled, she sowed, she taught Sam how to read crop signs in the soil like lines in a book. Ruth organized the pantry, took stock, labeled jars, cleaned every shelf like a ritual. Mabel and Josie helped the neighbors, sweeping porches, baking bread, even watching other children. Jonah learned to smile. Daniel sang. Eli took his first real steps straight into Clara's arms. The community began to notice, not just the children, but Clara. The way she looked people in the eye. The way she listened. The way she remembered everyone's names even when no one remembered hers. One Sunday, the church bell rang, and Clara arrived with all 7 children in tow, clothes, mended faces, clean shoes tied tight. The pews turned. People stared. Then the pastor rose and said, "Welcome home." Soon after, the town held a gathering to celebrate the start of planting season. Someone suggested Clara should say a few words. She shook her head at first, but Sam stepped forward. "She didn't come here to be important," he said. But she became it anyway. Clara stood then, slowly, quietly. Her voice was soft but steady. "I came here expecting a marriage. What I found was so much harder and far more worthy. This isn't just a family. It's a garden. Every hurt made a seed. Every day we survived was a root. And now we're blooming." The crowd stood in silence. Then came the first clap, and another. Then cheers. A week later, the county judge sent a formal order. Property title transferred. Land recognized. Household registered under Clara Mayfield, guardian of record caretaker, by right mother, by grace. Ruth framed it, hung it by the fireplace. But Clara said the only title that mattered was the one the children whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. Mama. Years passed. Children grew. Left, returned. Some stayed and built cabins of their own on land that once trembled under winter storms and legal threats. One day, a reporter came asking for the story. Clara smiled. "It's not my story, it's theirs." He asked for a photo. She stood with all 7 taller, now older arms wrapped around one another like roots holding soil. "What would you call this?" the reporter asked. She looked at the faces around her and answered, "A beginning." The land once unforgiving now bloomed with purpose. Carrots, onions, turnips, even daisies. Ruth had been right. Clara loved them, especially the yellow ones, small and defiant against the breeze. Neighbors began sending their children over for lessons, to learn to read, to sew, to listen. Clara never asked for coin, only that they brought what they could, a jar of honey, a pail of milk, a bundle of fresh kindling. She hung a small bell on the porch, not to signal trouble, but to invite community, and it rang almost every day. One morning in late autumn, a rider came down the hill, not in haste, but with purpose. He carried a parcel wrapped in oilcloth. Clara stepped out to meet him. "For you," he said. "Been sitting in the postmaster's hold room near 3 years. Name matched yours." Clara took the bundle. When she opened it, her hands stilled. Inside was a worn leather journal, and a letter dated a month before she had arrived in Dry Creek. Richard's handwriting. "Clara, if I'm gone when you arrive, don't be angry. I know it's a hard thing asking a woman to walk into an empty home, But I sent for you because I saw something in your letters that I hadn't seen in years, courage. My children. They've known too much loss. If you can stay even a little while, give them warmth. Let them see kindness in your eyes, not obligation. And if you must go, I won't blame you. But if you stay, then everything I ever hoped for in a wife, a partner, a mother, it'll have come true anyway. Yours in a promise I couldn't keep but prayed you would. Richard. Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it in the journal. She didn't cry, not out of coldness, but out of fullness, because she realized something Richard never could have known. She hadn't just stayed, she had become. The children found her that evening, seated on the porch, the bell beside her gently swaying in the wind. Who was it from? Sam asked. Clara looked up smiling. Someone who believed in me before he ever met me. Daniel leaned into her side. Mabel handed her a cup of cider. You always say stories have beginnings, Josie said, but this one feels like it never ends. Clara looked out over the land, toward the fence line, the turning trees, the woodpile stacked twice her height. That's the best kind, she whispered, the kind that keeps growing even when the last page is turned. Years passed like seasons do. Sam took to carpentry, built homes with his own hands, married a quiet girl named Ada who smiled more with her eyes than her lips. Ruth became a midwife, traveled from one town to the next with a satchel full of lavender gauze and quiet strength. She named her first daughter Clara. The twins Mabel and Josie stayed close. One ran a school, the other ran the farm. Daniel went east, became a teacher. But he never stopped sending letters home, always signed, Your Daniel, always. Jonah grew slow, strong, and steady. He planted trees that outlived fences. And Eli, who'd once crawled at Clara's feet, would one day stand behind a pulpit and tell people every Sunday, the first voice I ever trusted belonged to a woman who wasn't even trying to lead, just to love. Clara aged quietly. She never left the house Richard built. She added a second porch, grew mint near the windows, wrote long letters that she never sent. The bell still hung outside, not used much anymore, but always clean, always ready. One spring morning, Ruth came to visit. Clara sat in her chair, eyes closed, face turned to the sun. She looked asleep, and maybe in a way she was, but her hands were folded over a letter, the one Richard had written, worn but whole. She had waited long enough. She had kept every promise. They buried her beneath the apple tree she'd planted the second spring. No grand headstone, just a wooden plaque that read, Clara Mayfield, mother, by choice, builder of belonging. On the day of her funeral, it rained for the first time in 6 weeks. The crops drank deeply, and the bell rang once in the wind. No one pulled it. Some said it was coincidence. But the children she raised, they knew. 35 years later, the Mayfield home stood strong now, painted blue with new shutters and a porch swing that never stopped creaking even when no one sat in it. The bell still hung above the door. Visitors came often now, not out of need but out of reverence. They brought their children. Some brought journals, others brought flowers. One brought a microphone. Her name was Marin. A young reporter barely 23 from the city. She had read about the mother of Dry Creek in a collection of letters published by the Town Historical Society. Now she stood on the porch, notebook in hand, facing Ruth, gray-haired, proud-eyed, still keeping her shoulders square like Clara had taught her. Why do people come here? Marin asked. Ruth smiled, because they want to believe. In what? That one person can still matter. Marin walked through the house slowly. Every photo on the wall told a story. Children once barefoot and dirt-covered now stood in uniforms, graduation robes, wedding dresses. At the fireplace hung the framed document still bearing the name Clara Mayfield, guardian of record. Next to it, a second frame, this one handmade crooked, crafted by Daniel when he was 8. Inside a single word, Mama. They showed Marin the journal Clara had kept, yellowed pages written in neat cursive, every line a glimpse into days long gone but never forgotten. Clara had written of storms, of baking, of learning how to plow, of treating bee stings, and mending elbows and hearts. But one page was marked with a ribbon. On it, in bold strokes, If history forgets me, let it be because my children remembered who they were. Marin closed the book gently. You know, she whispered, I didn't believe in legacy before I got here. Ruth touched her shoulder. Then stay long enough. This house has a way of reminding people. That evening, they let Marin sleep in Clara's old room. She lay awake for a long time listening to the wind outside. Then the bell rang. Just once. She got up, stepped outside. The porch was empty. The trees were still. But for the first time in her young life, she didn't feel alone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that family isn't always blood, it's who stays, who shows up, who chooses to love. Tell us in the comments, what does mother mean to you? Like this video if Clara's story touched your heart. Subscribe to Tim's Stories and ring the bell, because sometimes the quietest heroes leave the loudest echoes. Share this story with someone who believes love is a choice, not just a title.